Thank you for joining us for our series dedicated to the 2014 Standards for Accreditation. As part of their membership, Middle States accredited institutions must demonstrate that they meet or exceed the expectations for academic and institutional integrity and quality promoted through the 2014 Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation. This module will share the expectations relating to Standard 6, Planning, Resources, and Institutional Improvement. After viewing this video, we hope that you will become familiar with the 2014 Standards for Accreditation, be able to assess institutional compliance using the criteria from Standard 6, understand what documentation will be useful in demonstrating compliance with Standard 6, be able to articulate the role of assessment as it relates to Standard 6, and better understand the Commission's requirements of affiliation and how they relate to Standard 6. While the Commission has many relevant resources to assist you and your colleagues with demonstrating compliance with the standards and requirements of affiliation, the focus of this presentation will come from the Commission's publication, Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation, the 13th edition. You can find this on the Commission's website and download a PDF version if you do not have a hard copy. This presentation will focus on Standard 6, which you can find by turning to page 12. In total, the process for ensuring compliance relies on a determination that an institution has demonstrated that it's in compliance with the Commission's 15 Requirements of Affiliation and 7 Standards for Accreditation. Compliance with both the Requirements of Affiliation and Standards for Accreditation is expected to be continuous. Institutions are, in most instances, comprehensively evaluated on both the Requirements of Affiliation and Standards for Accreditation at the time of their self-study evaluation. Institutions will be evaluated according to the requirements, standards, and their criteria within the context of institutional mission. This slide lists the Commission's 15 requirements of affiliation. Note that 3 requirements in particular, 8, systematic evaluation of all programs, 10, institutional planning, and 11, financial resources, are all directly related to Standard 6. Some requirements of affiliation will be addressed within the self-study document, while others may be addressed through some other compliance mechanism. This slide provides you with one recommended approach for aligning the requirements of affiliation likely to be addressed in the self-study document with the appropriate standards. This is one approach of many. However, the appropriate linkages are made between requirements of affiliation and the standards. Put another way, institutions can and will address various requirements of affiliation in the self-study report itself, as the chart demonstrates. Institutions endeavoring to demonstrate compliance with requirements of affiliation 8, 10, and 11 can do so successfully by addressing them partially in a well-written, analytically based self-study section that addresses Standard 6. Let's take a closer look at requirements of affiliation 8, 10, and 11. Requirement of Affiliation number 8 states that accredited institutions must engage in systematic evaluation of educational and other programs. Requirement of Affiliation number 10 communicates the Commission's expectation that institutional planning include a consideration of student achievement of educational goals, student learning, and the results of academic and institutional assessment. Requirement of Affiliation number 11 states that the institution has a financial base that is adequate to support its educational purpose and programs and ensures financial stability. Consistent with the guiding principles of the Commission, mission-centeredness, student learning, innovation, and continuous improvement, it's important to note that both the requirements of affiliation and standards for accreditation stress that institutions are expected to demonstrate that they engage in assessment processes that regularly inform continuous quality improvement, overall institutional effectiveness, and the effective management of student learning. Institutions will need to include within their self-study materials how the criteria within each standard is met, as well as how the relevant requirements of affiliation are also met. It's important to remember, however, that when an institution demonstrates that it meets Standard 6, it must also demonstrate how it complies with the relevant requirements of affiliation. This may or may not require a separate analysis within the self-study document, but a clear indicator addressing the appropriate requirement of affiliation will be necessary. Some institutions have provided headings that include references to specific requirements of affiliation, or have footnoted or offset notations in the margin of the self-study document to indicate that the analysis provided also speaks to and demonstrates compliance with the appropriate requirement of affiliation. While the Commission is not prescriptive in terms of how compliance is documented, institutions have to be mindful of the appropriate alignment of the requirements of affiliation with the standards and clearly indicate to the evaluation team where that has been satisfied in the self-study document. Accompanying and consistent with the requirements of affiliation are the Commission standards for accreditation. Let's review the language and criteria of Standard 6. Standard 6. Planning, resources, and institutional improvement. The institution's planning processes, resources, and structures are aligned with each other and are sufficient to fulfill its mission and goals, to continuously assess and improve its programs and services, and to respond effectively to opportunities and challenges. Ultimately, the commitment to mission is evident throughout the standards, and this remains true for Standard 6. The Commission expects that institutions, when responding to Standard 6, will show evidence of aligned planning processes and resources that are sufficient to and in support of the institution's strategic and operational goals, objectives, and strategies, while allowing the institution to respond effectively to opportunities and challenges. For example, if improving advising is a priority to an institution, what data would speak to that, and how would the institution's planning, resources, and structures begin to prioritize this improvement? Several points are worth noting. This standard emphasizes systematic planning. The standard emphasizes careful resource allocation. The standard emphasizes aligning planning and resources to mission and goals. Finally, the standard emphasizes the continued assessment of programs and services in order to respond to the changing opportunities and challenges in higher education. In what follows, the various criteria that constitute Standard 6 will be explained. This standard has a total of 9 criteria, which are noted on this and the next few slides in general terms. As you review the criteria, you and your colleagues should be thinking about resources that are available at the institution that could be relied upon to demonstrate compliance with each criterion. These can be policies, procedures, or other types of evidence that would demonstrate during review that the institution meets the criteria. Criteria 1 through 3 covered intended outcomes supporting mission, the documenting and communicating the planning and improvement process, and the aligning of financial planning and budgeting processes with the mission and goals. Criterion 4 through 6 represent the processes, resources, and structures that support the achievement of institutional outcomes. Finally, criterion 7 through 9 together represent the actual outcomes supporting the mission, or what the institution actually achieved. These 3 slides have highlighted the 9 criteria embedded within Standard 6. Now we will look more closely at each one. As we review each criterion, you should be thinking about what policies, procedures, or other documentation institutions may have to demonstrate compliance with the standards and requirements of affiliation. You should also be able to identify how and when institutions assess or review those, and what changes have resulted from their assessment. Criterion 1 requires institutions to have clearly stated institutional objectives that are both institutional as well as unit objectives. Often the latter are not quite as evident as the former. While the standard uses the term objectives, institutions may use some other reference, which is perfectly acceptable. These objectives should be linked to the mission and goals. These objectives should be clear and widely known. Assessment of both institutional and unit level objectives should be intentional so that institutions are able to demonstrate that resource allocation is aligned with assessment results as well as with the objectives, mission, and goals of the institution. Since periodic assessment is the final criterion of every standard, we'll circle back to this last item as we near the end of the review of all of the criteria. Criterion 2 states, clearly documented and communicated planning and improvement processes that provide for constituent participation and incorporate the use of assessment results. Overall, Standard 6 emphasizes that planning and resource allocation should not be ad hoc activities undertaken by a few. Criterion 2 is explicit in the need for institutions to include the campus community in larger planning processes. Documentation in this regard will be important to demonstrate how the institution provides for constituent participation and accounts for assessment results. An institution's financial planning and budgeting process should support the mission and goals at all levels, including the institutional level as well as the unit level. Having a clear mission accompanied by institutional goals is critical, and supporting the attainment of those will be evidenced by appropriate financial planning and budgeting processes. Institutional and unit level objectives and plans need to be in close alignment, and any planning process that is used at the institution will need to align with financial planning and budgeting processes. Criterion 4 focuses on the institution's ability to adequately allocate their human and financial resources to successfully support the institution's operations. Under the 2014 standards, it is important for institutions to consider all modalities of instruction, as well as all locations. Here, the criterion references wherever offered and however programs are delivered. For institutions with branch campuses, additional locations, or other instructional sites, what evidence will be used to demonstrate sufficient resources to support these locations? For institutions with distance education, what evidence can be used to demonstrate a technical infrastructure that supports that modality? Put simply, are the institution's programs adequately supported with fiscal, human, and technological resources to evidence achievement of clearly identified outcomes? Assessment practices should assist institutions with evaluating how adequately institutional operations are supported. Criterion 5 reiterates that in order to best support planning processes, it's critical to have well-defined decision-making processes and clarity around responsibility and accountability so that institutional plans can be achieved. Further, it's important for constituents to understand who is responsible for making decisions relating to those plans and who has the responsibility or authority to do so. Much like Criterion 4, Criterion 6 reminds institutions about the appropriate allocation of resources. Comprehensive planning is a critical component of Standard 6, and it will be important for institutions to engage in planning that supports the achievement of mission and attainment of goals. Strategic planning and financial planning should not happen in isolation, and any and all planning that the institution utilizes must be aligned. This criterion reiterates the importance of financial viability for our member institutions. Documentation of financial resources, funding base, and plans for financial development adequate to support its educational purposes and programs, which is reflected in the Commission's requirement for affiliation number 11. Thus, when demonstrating compliance with Criterion 7, institutions are expected to demonstrate a record of responsible fiscal management, which includes an external independent financial audit on an annual basis with appropriate follow-up. Institutions should provide evidence of their strategies to measure and assess the adequacy and efficient utilization of institutional resources required to support the institution's mission and goals. Within Standard 6, several criteria direct institutions to their assessment results. This criterion will warrant evidence around how the institution is measuring and assessing utilization of resources. How do institutional representatives know that resources are being used effectively in support of the mission and goals? Most institutions will be engaged in several activities enabling them to assess the effectiveness of resource allocation with respect to their core mission and strategic goals. Assessment, or the ability to show the degree to which intended outcomes are met, is core to self-study and institutional improvement. For this reason, let's talk a bit about outcomes, documentation, and evidence. When viewed through the lens of institutional mission, finished products, while necessary, are not in and of themselves outcomes. They are outputs, or things enabling the achievement of mission-related strategic outcomes. Institutions should conduct continuous assessment to ensure that resources are efficiently utilized to support the institution's mission and goals. For example, a college may undergo assessment and discover that it should be providing additional services to the campus and community while providing alternative revenues to fund critical services, and as a result may be able to work together to create new entrepreneurial efforts and focus on improving revenue, such as replacing the college's bookstore with a company that provides students with the opportunity to buy their books online at a significant savings. With periodic assessment included in every standard, institutional assessment practices continue to be critical. The Commission expects institutions to engage in sound assessment that lends to institutional improvement. The next slide provides you with basic, key questions relating to the assessment within this standard. Again, assessment is embedded in every standard. Key questions regarding the assessment taking place relating to planning, resources, and institutional improvement are: is the process meaningful? To what extent do stakeholders trust what information is in front of them? How well are the assessments directly related to the institution's planning, resources, and institutional improvement? Is the process useful? After receiving the assessment information, how engaged are key institutional stakeholders in using the information to enhance the institution's planning, resources, and institutional improvement to consider shifts in services or programs or in other areas that could impact the institution's planning, resources, and institutional improvement? What are the ties from the institution's assessment practices to the institutional planning, resource allocation, and institutional effectiveness evaluations? Is the process cost-effective and efficient? Is the process efficient enough to be worth the effort? To what extent has assessment become an ordinary process as opposed to being a burden? Can multiple stakeholders attest to how the assessment process has added value to their professional practice? These are important questions that, when answered, can enable institutions to continuously improve the student experience, ensuring that the institution's planning, resources, and institutional improvement is maximized and sustained over time. Having reviewed all of the criteria, it's important to come back to and reflect upon the language of the standard. These criteria, taken together, specify the characteristics or quality that encompass Standard 6. Alongside the standard itself, these criteria should be considered holistically within the context of institutional mission. Remember, the criteria do not represent a checklist. However, they embody the areas that institutions are expected to address within the standard. The language of the standard should not be lost within the criteria, and institutions should demonstrate how they embody the language of the standard, as well as have policies, procedures, or other documentation relating to each criterion. In summary, Standard 6 asks us to focus on the degree to which the planning process institutions develop and resource yield results support the institutional mission. Let's focus on evidence for a moment. Support for planning needs to be systematic and originate at the highest levels. Responsible planning looks beyond a one-year horizon and, particularly in the case of tuition-dependent institutions, develops and resources recruitment and retention activities in a manner that is both realistic and provides a reasonable chance for success. This slide provides you with a list of possible policies, procedures, and documentation that institutions may use to demonstrate that they meet this standard. This list does not imply that these are the required documents, nor does it imply that these are the only documents. What the Commission wants to convey is that it will be critically important for you and your colleagues to determine what evidence, in the form of policies, procedures, or other documentation, exists at the institution to provide evidence of effectiveness, institutional improvement, and compliance under this standard. Aligning institutional evidence alongside each of the criterion lends to a gap analysis that can be done to determine where resources may need to be developed, better documented, or updated. The current practice and process at the Commission is to capture institutional evidence in what we call a documentation roadmap. This is a template document that provides institutions with a listing of the criteria for each standard, with an accompanying empty box for institutions to fill in with their evidence. It is a document that allows for an institution to conduct a gap analysis quickly and easily, and serves as a tool for gathering evidence. Again, because the criteria are listed along with the requirements of affiliation, this template will promote resource and evidence gathering in an organized and methodical manner designed to support the accreditation activities. The documentation roadmap template is available on the Commission's website. In addition to these videos, the Commission hosts a variety of activities, online and face-to-face, designed to keep you informed about our expectations, support the activities of member institutions, and provide you with avenues to collaborate with colleagues across the region. Those include webinars, workshops, training for peer evaluators, as well as our annual conference. If you have ideas about specific opportunities that you would like to see the Commission support, please contact us to let us know. You can find additional information about the Commission through our website, including how to reach staff. If you have any questions about the information presented today, please contact your staff liaison at Middle States. Every member institution is assigned a staff liaison. To find who's been assigned to your institution, visit the website and click on Institutions. Find your institution listed and click on Detailed View. Other information about your institution is available through the link Statement of Accreditation Status, which is below the Detailed View link.